they stated that they wanted to commit jihad.
A plot to attack the United States using weapons of mass destruction.
I think we're as safe today as we've been ever before.
The plan was to bomb 2 synagogues and shoot down US military aircraft. 4 men guilty on charges of terrorism and sent to prison.
He came to this community and mostly in the mosque, identified himself as a Muslim businessman.
This was right after 9/11, and they were in desperate need of somebody that could interact with the Muslim community as an informant.
It was all fake, it was all set up by the FBI.
Did police stop what could have been the biggest terror attack after 9/11?
You can't allow those attacks to take place. You have got to stop it before they are ready to go do it.
Or was it a crime that never would have happened, instigated by an FBI informant? More than a decade after their conviction, lawyers for the Nuremberg 4 want the men released.
It's not fair to target one particular group of people and offer them large amounts of money or other kinds of inducement to commit a crime that they weren't going to commit otherwise.
How did it change you?
I'm always angry now.
Just a few moments ago, something believed to be a plane crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
It appeared to bank sharply and smash directly, perhaps purposefully, into, oh my goodness,
oh God,
there's another one. Now it's obvious, I think, that there's a second plane just crashed into the World Trade Center. I think we have a terrorist act of proportions that we cannot begin to imagine at this juncture.
After 9/11, what the US government did is they decided that they had to do anything they could to prevent another terrorist attack on American soil. If they took out thousands of innocent people, destroyed their families, they didn't care. They basically had this mentality of, if there's, and Dick Cheney said something like this, if there's a 1% chance that this person might someday in the future commit a crime, commit a terrorism crime, we have to go after them now.
It will help law enforcement to identify, to dismantle, to disrupt, and to punish terrorists before they strike.
By the end of September 2001, the FBI's director Robert Mueller told President Bush that there were more than 300 potential Al-Qaeda sleeper cells inside the United States. A year later, intelligence officials estimated there could be up to 5,000 Al-Qaeda terrorists hiding within Muslim communities across the US. Almost all of these suspected terrorists turned out to be ghost leads.
It is the U.S. government's way of fighting a war against Islam. That seems to be what they've been doing. It is not done fairly. It is done to get convictions of people that otherwise would never have engaged in crime. But because they are Muslim, they feel they have the right to go in there and try to lock people up preemptively before these people do something.
وقفينا على آثارهم بعيسى ابن مريم مصدقا لما بين يديه وأنزل التوراة والإنجيل.
Newburgh lies on the banks of the Hudson River in New York State, about an hour north of New York City. There is an active Muslim community here. They all know each other and look out for one another.
We are welcome anytime. We don't have anything to hide, and we have nothing to be afraid of. It started after 9/11. He came to this community and mostly in the mosque, identified himself as a Muslim businessman. He had business around this area, and he came to this mosque, visited a couple of times, mostly during off hours, like in the afternoon time, evening time, sitting on the corner trying to gossip to some of the Muslims. And talking to them sometimes about the strange way of talking, like about jihad, why we are not interested in jihad, those kind of things. We heard later on, initially we found him a strange person, does not belong to the community.
It's a technique that goes back long before any of this. I go back, my understanding of it goes back to COINTELPRO, which happened in the 70s. The FBI became concerned about particularly the Black Power movement, but also Vietnam protesters, also American Indian movement, and decided to just use illegal surveillance and harassment, and used other techniques, including bringing false charges against leaders that they wanted to take down. And in a couple of cases, there were some actual assassinations of black leaders. This program was finally identified brilliantly through a burglary of the FBI offices, which distributed all this material to the press, and who finally picked up on it. And it was supposedly shut down in 1974 after congressional hearings. But in fact, the program was never shut down. It has always been sort of sitting there in the back, and as soon as 9/11 happened, they just took the wraps off again and went right back to doing it in an enhanced version of it. It's control. It's control of groups that we don't like or are suspicious of.
I spent 31 years focusing primarily on counterterrorism. In the 1980s, I was the lead investigator and led the task force on the Lockerbie bombing over Scotland in 1988. After I retired, I spent 15 years training law enforcement all over the world on the issue of counterterrorism. And an entrapment case is one you hope you never have, because every investigation, what you hope is a perfect case where you collect evidence, you have good solid witnesses, and of course today, if it's possible, DNA and video evidence, something that a jury can touch and feel and get their arms around. But there's no such thing anymore as a perfect case. But the stories about entrapment means that somebody went astray where there was no crime, but you created a crime, and those are the things that we try not to do.
What's the logic behind using an FBI informant?
There's a lot of times when FBI informants are in positions that an FBI agent or police officer could never get in, whether he is part of an organization, part of a group, part of a plot.
A man named Maksud began to frequent the Masjid al-Ikhlas in Newburgh. He drove expensive cars and posed as a rich Pakistani businessman, but Maksud's real name was Shahid Hussein, and he was sent to listen out for extremism and report back to the FBI.
Shahid Hussein is one of the great characters of this drama. He came over from Pakistan. He claims, with apparently some truth, that his brother is a billionaire land developer in Pakistan, but apparently he got into some trouble. There may be murder charges pending against him in Pakistan, so for whatever reason he came to the United States. Shahid Hussein got a job in the Department of Motor Vehicles translating for learner's permits and for people who didn't speak English. And at some point he realized that he could not only translate the questions, but also translate the answers, and thus guarantee a 100% success rate for his clients. And so he would charge a fee for doing that. Eventually he was caught. There's some 70 felonies brought against him, and he was eventually convicted, and he was going to be sentenced, serve his sentence in the United States jail, and then be returned to Pakistan, be deported to Pakistan. And the FBI, at that time, this was right after 9/11, and they were in desperate need of somebody that could interact with the Muslim community as an informant.
There are parts of Newburgh that are very obviously struggling. boarded up businesses and street crime are commonplace.
Well, Newburgh is historically has a dark side. There are some drug business. There are some criminals who live here and they use drugs for their business.
It was an easy place for Shahid Hussein to befriend potential suspects for a sting operation. Hussein met James Cromity first. He was a Walmart employee who claimed to be a drug dealer. Cromity then involved the 3 other men, David Williams, Onta Williams and Lagar Payan.
He was sweet, caring, loved his family. He was a protector, and we had this bond that I always say that was my first love. And we was very, very close, still are. And he was just a great son and a great brother. And everybody in Newburgh loved him.
David was introduced to Islam by his Muslim grandmother and sometimes attended the Newburgh Mosque on Fridays. One day, David introduced his mother to a new friend he had met at the mosque, Maqsood.
He introduced me to him and he was like, "Oh, I love your son," and he offered to give my son Lord a trip to Disney World and when he gets better. But I didn't really pay it no mind because it was just something about him that I didn't have a good feeling about, but I didn't know what it was.
These 4 guys who were really down and out, they didn't have any money. They had prior convictions, like low-level felony drug convictions, things like that. They didn't have driver's licenses. They mostly didn't have jobs. A couple of them had like part-time jobs. And they were basically, one of them was approached first by an informant, Shahid Hussein, a really notorious informant, and basically told that he could get all sorts of riches if he was going to work with him, and that he worked for this terrorist group, and it was all fake, it was all set up by the FBI. And this guy was kind of interested, but finally, after talking to the informant for like months, he wasn't like getting any money out of it, and he just kind of said, I don't really want to do this, and he stopped talking to him. Finally, he gets him on the phone again. The informant gets him on the phone again and says, "Brother, I promised you $250,000, but you don't want it." So then he says, I'm in. And then he got the other people.
One of the 4 men had mental issues so severe that he was storing bottles of his own urine at his apartment. Maqsood, aka Shahid Hussein, offered them substantial amounts of money to follow his instructions, which included plotting to bomb 2 synagogues and a plan to fire a Stinger missile at US military planes. Shahid convinced the 4 men that they must carry out jihad in the name of Islam.
Those were targets that the government came up with. And the informant asked these guys, just pull up some, maps of these places. They had no idea how to do that, and they had no interest in doing it. One of them was given a camera to take pictures of the location, and he sold the camera, right? Because he had no interest in it.
The 4 men went to Walmart to buy cell phones. They scouted out the 2 synagogues that were in the Riverdale area of the Bronx in New York City. They also drove to Brooklyn to buy a gun from a gang leader. On May 20th, 2009, the men placed bombs outside 2 synagogues. The bombs were actually fake, given to them by the FBI informant Shahid Hussein. As they headed to the second location in a car driven by Shahid, they were stopped by armored police vehicles and arrested.
Stated they wanted to commit jihad. They were disturbed about what was happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan, that Muslims were being killed. They all made the statement that they didn't, if Jews were killed in this attack, it wouldn't, that would be all right.
Did you have any idea at all what he was getting himself into, what he was getting involved in?
No.
How did you find out?
When they kicked the door in.
What did it feel like when the FBI came kicking your door?
First, I didn't know who they... Only thing I could say was I kept telling them that they had the wrong house. And I really knew it was serious when I actually saw the young man's badge on his shirt, and they had on the gas mask, and they put a bomb dog in.
James Cromity had frequently made anti-Semitic comments, but he also often made up claims of criminal activity, and he didn't know much about Islam.
They had sort of converted to Islam when they were in prison, but they weren't really religious. They didn't really know much about it. They didn't go to the mosque. And they were just offered a lot of money. They were offered $5,000 each and the possibility of other jobs and cars and plane tickets and things like that if they agreed to this terrorist plot, but they had no interest in it.
I don't want anyone to do it. You think about it before you speak. You understand what I'm saying? This is American soldier? Hold up. This is American soldier? I don't even care. If it's sick, if it's wounded, I kill. That's what I'm worried about.
The Nuremberg Four were sentenced to 25 years in prison. The FBI informant Shahid Hussein testified against them during their trial.
And some people at my job, when they had it on TV, it took everything in my power not to say something, because we don't have the same last name, so they didn't know that was my son on TV. To watch your son being handcuffed and dragged and people spitting and saying all of this stuff, and the people on your job saying negative stuff about him, and I couldn't say, don't talk about my son like that. Just broke down and started crying. And the lady came there, one of the nurses, and she asked me what was wrong. And I told her, that young man that's on TV that you're talking about, that's my son. And she never said nothing to nobody on the job, because I thought they was gonna fire me.
It was very, very clear that all they wanted was the money. And yet the judge told them, according to the law, if they say things showing that they're agreeing to do this plot and they're not hesitant about it, then you got to convict them.
As an FBI undercover agent or as an FBI informant, you can't push anyone into committing a crime.
No, absolutely not. No, you cannot make the crime. The person has to be, I'm trying to think of the exact word I want to use, but they have to be on their way to that criminality. There's got to be something that says they're going to do it. You can't make the crime. You can't make the crime. They have to make the crime. You can facilitate it. You know, what will give you some dummy explosive.
The case was seen as a successful prevention of a terror attack on US soil. In 2013, the Nuremberg Four attempted an appeal to overturn their convictions and failed.
Did you ever think, since he was jailed, that he would actually do what he said that he would do in those recordings?
No. Because when I saw the video of them in the car, and he was saying he wasn't trying to hurt nobody, make sure nobody in the building. That's, I mean, and me knowing him as his mother, I know that's not in him. That he doesn't have, because I never talked about none of that when he was younger.
During the trial, there was criticism of the FBI. The judge presiding over the case said that she believed that the crime only existed because the government had instigated it, planned it, and brought it to fruition. Judge Colleen McMahon described the Nuremberg Four as thugs for hire rather than religious martyrs.
Every one of these cases is extremely difficult. You can't allow those attacks to take place. You have got to stop it before they are ready to go do it.
The defense of entrapment has been unsuccessful in every terrorism-related case after 9/11. The burden of proof lies on the defendant to provide evidence that the government induced them to commit a crime, and the focus is always on whether the defendant had criminal intent.
What's the conviction rate amongst Muslims?
100%. It's basically 100%. The courts are definitely biased towards Muslims. They don't know anything about Muslims. They're bought into the general fear that, oh, they might be terrorists.
We have a great judicial system, in my view. People get acquitted because there is judicial oversight. There's the U.S. Attorney Office oversight. The FBI provides oversight to these cases.
And once you say FBI, you know you definitely don't have a chance against them, because the rules twist for them. They could make their own rules.
It's not fair to target one particular group of people and offer them large amounts of money or other kinds of inducement to commit a crime that they weren't going to commit otherwise.
It's racism. It's just pure racist, racist. I'll leave it there.
No, right after 9/11, there was a huge focus on preventing terrorism. And the focus was not supposed to be on religion, but a lot of people, including the media, portrayed it as an attack on Islam, when it wasn't supposed to be. It was never the intention.
There's this claim that the more cases the FBI closes, the more convictions that the FBI gets, the more budget they get from the federal government. So obviously it's kind of an incentive for the FBI to go out there and catch more bad guys, or even if they are not bad guys, let's make them look like bad guys because we're going to get more budget from the federal government.
I don't think it's anything to do with how many cases you have. It has usually to do with what the threat is.
So you wouldn't say that there's any kind of stigma within the FBI towards quote-unquote jihadist Muslims on US soil?
I don't ever remember a time, even the 1 year I worked after 9/11, when somebody says, hey, we got to go get this Muslim guy.
These terror charges carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. All 4 men are currently serving 25 years each.
What's been your biggest frustration so far?
The fact that it's taken so long for my son to come home, and I'm not the same person I was 14 years ago.
How did it change you?
I'm always angry now, sad, I've never been depressed, and anxiety, and I feel helpless.
There was a new law passed that went into effect in 2019 called the First Step Act, and it allowed people to file what's called a compassionate release motion. Basically, it turns out that it's a motion to get a reduced sentence for any extraordinary and compelling reason. We realized we could file this motion for the Newburgh 4 and talk about how unfair it was for them to get sentenced to 25 years. We can't do anything about the entrapment defense. That needs to change really by Congress, or at least by the courts, a higher court. We couldn't do anything about that.
The Muslims here say they are traumatized by the events of 2009. Some say they still live with the feeling of being watched.
We have to be united, and we are more and more educated people are coming into the society, and they are not afraid of falsehood, and we are going to speak the truth, and we are going to be vocal.